So we are going to discuss three more kinds of evolution. A couple of these you kind of maybe already know a little bit about, but one of them you don't. Allopatric speciation, you've heard of before, but not the name. Sympatric speciation is something might be new to you. And then GMOs you might know something about as well. So allopatric speciation. This is when a new species develops from geographic or reproductive isolation, usually a combination of both. And you know this as adaptive radiation, probably from biology. These are the Galapagos Islands where Darwin collected his data on the finches. And the idea was that, one finch or one population of finches settled on one island, but over time populated all the islands in isolation. So they were all allowed to adapt separately and develop different characteristics. And so from this one species, right, separated out into all these different species of fish. And that's really what I call adaptive radiation, but it's also called allopatric speciation. This is an incredibly important one when it comes to agriculture. And it's the evolution of a species into two species without geographic isolation. Now you might wonder, how is that possible? Because if you're not geographically isolated, then there could be a mixing of genes in the gene pool. Well, this happens because of what's called polyploidy. And polyploidy is an increase in the number of chromosomes. Because once you have a different set of chromosomes, a different number of chromosomes, there's no way you could ever cross, and you're totally reproductively isolated instead of, if not geographically isolated. So let's talk about that real quickly. So we have haploid cells and we have diploid cells. Our haploid cells are our sex cells in the sperm and in the egg, where we actually just have one allele from everything. But then they combine and into the zygote, and then every one of our cells, except for our sex cells, are diploid cells. You know that, it has two sets of chromosomes. But let's just say something happens, a chemical or something makes it so that all of a sudden all of your chromosomal material are tripled, or even times 6 or times 10. Now you've got a different number of chromosomes, and there's no way that you can have meiosis taking place. It just don't match up. So you're by definition immediately a new species, and then you're completely isolated. And so a lot of that's called polyploidy, right? And you can have twice the DNA or 3 times or 6 times the DNA. And, it happens randomly. We can make it happen. So farmers can make that happen. Why would they, though? Why would a farmer make a plant polyploidy? What's the benefit of having 3 times or 6 times the DNA? Think about it. Think about what DNA does, and why would you want more instructions? Well, if you have more instructions, you're just going to make more of everything, which makes your fruit is just going to be bigger. Generally speaking, with polyploidy, you just have more production of everything, and so everything is bigger and juicier, and so that's what farmers do. But it does give you immediate reproductive isolation. If we go back to this slide with the wheat, you can see that there's just so many more wheat kernels. Which one are you going to grow if you're a farmer? Looks like you have 6 times the amount of kernels on that common wheat, where the original wheat didn't have nearly as much. The last one we're going to study a little bit more later is genetically modified organisms. And what is a genetically modified organism? What do you know about genetically modified organisms? How are they different? Go ahead. How do you make one? A genetically modified organism means you take one gene or one small set of genes from one organism and you put it into another organism. This is never going to happen in nature by itself because it takes a lot of technology. But when you do that, you're adding genes. And so it's incredibly rapid evolution. And it's not anything to do with chance because you're designing the new species and you're putting in a trait. For example, you could take, and they've done this, they've taken an enzyme or chemical from a fish that keeps its blood from freezing, and they've put it into a tomato plant so that the tomato has that same chemical that stops it from freezing. There's no way that fish gene is ever going to make it in that tomato genome unless we do that. So we'll talk more about all the possibilities and the problems with GMOs, but that's just another kind of evolution. So there's 3 more kinds of evolution we have in our bag of tricks, and I will see you in class.